2 hours, and I hit record, and then what the person said while saying it, I was thinking, are you kidding me? And then it was gone. But I was writing furiously the whole time because that's the way I am anyway. And then sometimes I put it down because you don't want them to know where you're focused.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to time your writing. If they say one thing, then when they just get into general stuff, then you write the other stuff that they had. So learn the hard way. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm already recording, so I'm not forgetting anymore. Just took that thing off. Okay, so I'm just going to do a brief introduction and hand over to you and disappear whilst you answer. But let's just try and enjoy it.
Okay, good.
Okay, great. So, okay, so I need to look into the camera as well.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Suzanne Knabe-Nicole from Police Science Doctor. And today I'm speaking to the wonderful Dr. Marla Freeman. So she's a police psychologist and she's the chairman of Badge of Life, and we'll be speaking more about what she does there. She's also director of investigations at Marla W. Friedman PC. And she does a lot of other work. Today we're going to be speaking about mental health in policing. And I'm going to hand over, please. Marla, who are you and why might people know you?
Okay, probably you know me more on the national level because I'm chairman of Badge of Life, which is the national nonprofit association for mental health and suicide prevention, specifically for law enforcement. So I train, I teach at the police academy. I have a group of trainers that I can send anywhere in the country if we're called upon. And so that's probably how my name gets out there, or publications. I write for law enforcement magazines.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about Badge of Life. What is it and why was it set up?
Badge of Life was first set up about 15 years ago. And interestingly enough, it was set up to try and track suicide rates. And so the focus was on gathering this information because in treatment, you know, I'd be hearing all this stuff. Everybody would be hearing it. And we all knew the numbers were high, you know, more killed by suicide in the line of duty. But that's just general information. But when I became chairman 3 years ago, I started looking into the research methods, and I found them to be not the scientific method. I mean, people would call in if they knew of one, or they saw it on Facebook, or they read it in the newspaper, or saw it online. And so I had to explain, because I'm the only psychologist at Badge of Life in terms of our board, that we, you know, we're evidence-based at Badge of Life, so we can't put that information out there anymore. But then what we noticed, so we pulled back from that, and our main focus now has always, since we switched over, is training and education about mental health and suicide prevention. And so that is what we do. And we left off the whole statistical piece of that. Now, what you will see frequently is numbers quoted in newspapers and articles, and even written in peer-reviewed journals about what those numbers are. But the fact is, in the US, we have no national mandatory reporting. All reporting is voluntary, which means that if a family does not want to have suicide on their loved one's death certificate, they'll literally go to the ME, the medical examiner. They won't always change it. And some people are fearful that they won't be able to be buried in sacred ground. And very often, if it's a suicide, the spouse loses their benefits immediately, health insurance, everything gone. So a lot of chiefs just do not report for a lot of reasons. And so rather than report the false number, at one point I had just thought about and contacted a lot of people about making it mandatory, but it's got to be legislation at the national level. because there's a lot of people that gathered this information. But I just worry we're missing officers, and it's disrespectful to the family. And so until we pass some legislation that makes it mandatory reporting, those numbers, sadly, I don't know where everyone gets their different numbers. I just know that they're not accurate.
That's quite interesting. I don't think that actually gets discussed much. I don't think that's very public knowledge, that all these numbers might not actually be accurate. But do you get a sense of whether the problem is getting any worse or any better? And how has 2020 maybe affected law enforcement officers in that realm?
It's actually a good question. I don't know, because of the underreporting in terms of suicide. I do know that the pressure on officers during the pandemic has been incredible. I'm seeing people now that I haven't seen in 10 years and 20 years that have come back. They're under so much pressure. And each state has different laws. And I don't want to go too specifically on my state, but unfortunately in Illinois, we have a law that if an officer goes for inpatient psychiatric, meaning depression or trauma, they lose their gun. They have to have a registration for gun here, and then they lose their job. So they're not likely to do that. And for the most part, people don't need to go inpatient. So mental health check-in, outpatient therapy, even substance abuse, even if it is inpatient, none of those will trigger that law, meaning that they would lose their job. However, when you explain it to officers, they're suspicious, by nature, and I'm not going. So that's been a problem.
Yeah, that is a major deterrent, and bordering, I think, on the, okay, I was going to say irresponsible, but I guess that if a police agency had been aware that an officer was suffering severely from mental health issues, and then something happens, they would probably be liable in some way. And some people would ask the question, hang on, why was this person still armed when we know they're mentally unstable? Now, that is something very superficial. And like you said, there are nuances. Some things will trigger, other things will not. But on the other hand, it's very irresponsible to deter people from seeking help who need it, because then they can't deal with things. So I think do you have a solution with that? Because there is a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Well, it's brilliant, the way you're saying it, because what happens is you're in a position where all this pressure and stress is building and building. And so I asked chiefs, who do you want on the street? Do you want an officer who's depressed and anxious, having panic attacks, a lot of things that would interfere with their reaction time, and plus just disruptive to their life on the job and at home? Or do you want someone who's been treated, and then you give them a gun and put them out there? And yet the stigma is still so great. I don't know how it is, in England, but in the US, we're very Puritan, and it's just still stuck. And so when we talk about the mental health check-in, we'll talk a little bit more about, breaking the stigma.
I think there is a big difference between the US and the UK in that there is still a stigma, but it's getting a lot better. We're talking a lot more and in more productive ways about mental health. But we don't have many armed officers. So we have, the system is different. We have 43 regional geographical police agencies in England and Wales, plus one Police Scotland in Scotland. And there are only specially trained armed response officers who actually have guns. Everyone else doesn't. They have CS spray, they have their batons, they have torches, and because it's a different policing culture, and because the population also is nowhere near as armed as they are in the US. I would love to see an American officer coming over here, getting a uniform as an exchange project and having a panic attack because they're feeling naked without their gun. But so that's different. So we don't actually have many armed officers. They get called out for specialist in incidents, and So that's one thing. And I'm not aware that being in treatment in any way prevents you automatically from fulfilling any role. I may be wrong, but I'm just not aware of that being the case, which is obviously good, because we want to encourage treatment, because we know, I mean, so one statistic that came up from some research from Cambridge was that police officers are 5 times as likely to suffer from PTSD as the normal member of the public. And also 1 in 5 police officers already has symptoms of PTSD, but doesn't necessarily realize that it is PTSD, what they're experiencing.
Yeah, you're correct. And you have to remember that the laws are different in every state. So there are some states where they can go in for treatment and still maintain their job. The other piece is going over to England. That would be difficult. It's what we call don't bring a knife to a gunfight. So a lot of different issues, but stigma is lightening a little bit. I notice I teach at the police academy, the younger ones, they're more open. I mean, they'll ask questions in class, whereas when I teach field training officers, they've already been on the job a number of years. They're not raising their hand, they're not offering information about their lives. But the young ones, they don't know yet. And they're saying, hey, my husband's got that disorder, or this, it's kind of a pleasure, to have the young ones in there. But it changes over time, because soon as they get in the car with their field training officer, the FTO is who teaches them how to be a cop. And that's why I like to go on the FTO level, because then I can tell them, when you get your probation or your rookie in the car, here's what I want you to do. Here's some actual sentences to use so that it's okay if they're upset seeing a dead body. The whole old school was suck it up, kid. That's it. And that was obviously not working well. So I just go very heavy on the kinds of things to say. And if they're not sure, then I talk about that with them. And it's interesting because I hang out with them on break and just make them comfortable with a psychologist, because a lot of them are already, nervous about what is that and why is she here and what are we doing? And then in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, then they'll call me. Hey, listen, can I come in and talk about something? So then I feel good, because I know then it hit home that I got to them. And so we're seeing that more and more. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to see the change, to be here, to see that change over. And, very shortly, we have a lot of people that are aging out and retiring. So we will have new forces, in a decade, it'll look totally different than it does now.
That's quite interesting. So it might be a different culture and a different demographic coming into the police that perhaps is a lot more aware of mental health, well-being, a lot more open-minded, knows more about work-life balance. And we all know people nowadays don't go into a job anymore expecting to stay in it for 30 years and then retire. They're going to be doing different jobs, gathering different life experiences. And so maybe if we can't change the older settled officers, like you say, they're retiring at some point, and maybe the culture will change with younger people coming in. Now, you mentioned earlier that a Badge of Life does training. Whom do you train and in what?
We train actually anyone who calls us. So somebody may call from a department within Illinois, or anywhere in the nation, and just say, could you put a program together for us? Or we need help with peer support. How does that work? Or can you put a mental health program together? We individualize. So some people want us out there for an hour, some want us out there for 2 days. And my feeling is, whatever you invite us to do, we will do. We will help you. And, there's departments that have, 14,000 versus a department that is 30. And most departments in the country have less than 15 officers on board. So it's a lot of variety. And I have trainers here in Illinois, but then I have them in other states as well. So I can kind of launch them from there. In the beginning, I was the only trainer. So it was getting overwhelming, and so finally when I became chairman, I thought I'm going to start vetting, and get some new people in here that can train, because some people aren't comfortable in public, or speaking in public, or they're not that engaging. And I didn't want anyone to stand at the lectern and just talk. no, you have to, I kind of work the room. So that's what I look for. And in addition, over all these years, probably the last 10, I've been working on a list of vetted mental health providers that can work with law enforcement specifically, because the culture is very specific. So, and that's mostly in Illinois, but we have surrounding states, and we've expanded somewhat to anywhere in the country. If I know someone, because I'm in a lot of national associations, I know someone's good, I go, can I put you on the list? And especially now with telehealth, it's giving us a lot more flexibility, because I'm licensed in Illinois and Michigan here, which means I can provide treatment in either state. I can train in any state, but I can only provide treatment in those two states. So now they have a new thing called Psych Pact, and it came out of the pandemic, so that they gather all your information. There's a central house that does that. And there's about 10 other states now that we can treat people with telehealth. So if you need a specialist in law enforcement, so it gives a lot more leeway and really expands on that group. And there's a lot of us that have vetted lists, and all of us we all know each other, that train and share information up and back, and it's just been really great. I mean, I met people I would never meet, and I got friends in Canada now, and they're just wonderful. And I did peer support training in Canada, and was really fabulous. So I think I always say cooperate, don't compete. And so the more that people can join together, and that's why I love what you're doing. It's just so embracing of everybody, and everyone can get information and share information. And ultimately that's what we need. That's what we need. The more singular we are, the less information that you gather, the less you're familiar with the research. It's more difficult.
So you're really attacking the problem from two different sides, aren't you? You're doing preventative training to officers being asked by the agency to come in before things go wrong, but you're also treating people one-on-one who already have problems. Can you tell us a little bit about what do you think is the best way of preventing or dealing with mental health problems in law enforcement? What is your recipe for keeping people healthy and well?
We are very strong on the mental health check-in. So this means that the department has to, break through that stigma, and the chief has to say, we have a mandatory mental health check-in, meaning every year, well, once a year at least, you go and see a vetted provider, and you can talk about whatever you want. And what I explain when I'm training is I go, the purpose of the mental health session is that you get to know somebody and build a relationship. Because if you're in a crisis or you're involved in a shooting, the chances of you going online and just looking up a name out of the blue, it's just not going to happen. So I may have trained somebody 4 years ago, and then they're involved in a shooting, and they maybe come for the mental health check-in and they know me, then they'll call me. Whereas I know if they didn't know me or someone like me, they would just kind of sit on it, and it gets worse and worse over the years. And in addition to working with municipalities, local police departments, I also work federal. So there's a number of those agencies that I see as well. And a lot of those officers do undercover work, and there's tremendous amount of trauma involved in undercover work. And so I love seeing them, because I have specialized treatment for trauma sensation. And so it's just nice. It's nice to have them in there and then see them feel better really quickly. But the mental health check-in is sort of the basis of how we got started when I started pushing more on the therapeutic side. So I developed a program called Chiefs Lead the Way. And what I tell chiefs is, here's the thing, I want you to go for mental health check-in. And then I want you to go back to the department, go to roll call, say, hey, I had a check-in, and guess what? No problem. We just chatted. It was all good. And I'd like you all to go. And the thing about the mental health check-in is there's no report. Nothing goes back to the department, because that's their fear. They have in-house, but most cops won't use their in-house. EAP, employee assistance programs. They just don't trust it. So we really push for going to an outside provider. And so the Chiefs Lead the Way program, if the chief goes, then it doesn't feel as maybe punitive. I don't know really, or stigmatized. So if they're coming back to the department and talking about it in really kind ways, please, then we get a lot of calls. And then we're thrilled. And a lot of them, surprisingly, you would think they come for the one session and out. I can't tell you the percentage that just stay for therapy. Once they get their foot in the door, they're like, hey, by the way, while I got you, I'm having problems with my marriage, or my kids got ADD, or how do I handle X, Y, and Z? So it's always based on the relationship for us. And so that's the underlying vision, is break the stigma and build a relationship. And confidentiality, number one. Nothing goes back to the department.
And then so obviously one great benefit of you coming into police agencies and doing some training is that you're normalizing the experience, like you say, of them speaking and having exposure to a psychologist, and they're not being scanned up and down and analyzed and judged, which is sometimes people think that's what happens when you study psychology, you just go around analyzing people.
I know.
And then if something does come up, they might be more comfortable, and they already have someone in mind if they do want to speak to someone. What are the best ways in those sessions when you have a captive audience? What is the best way of equipping people with tools to maybe use in the future that they can take with them and remember over the years, so that they're better equipped with some extra resilience?
It's a perfect question, because here's what I tell them. I'm going to help you build a toolbox, because I don't want you dependent on me. I want you to be able to use the following skills. So I teach them really, it's so cool. Tom Bunn wrote a book. You might want to look it up called Panic Free. And he teaches how to release oxytocin at will, which is the natural relaxant. Cops are used to cortisol and adrenaline, just burning up their systems. So I teach them how to release oxytocin at will. I teach them distraction exercises. I also find relaxation. Some want it on tape. Some I just teach and they're able to do. I send them for meditation. The system is hyper aroused. And so the more control we can get over that, and the more the officer has control over that, the more comfortable and the more powerful they feel. And so all that goes into it. Now, if they have something more serious, then I have specialized training in prolonged exposure. And that was developed by Edna Foa, who's just a genius, probably the top person in anxiety in the country, probably in the world. She developed prolonged exposure for the military. And I was just so lucky, I don't know now, probably maybe 10, 12 years ago, and took the training, which was very strict, because they were also doing research on the training. So I'll be honest with you, I was shocked how well it worked. I had officers and federal agents that came in who had trauma for 6 years, 8 years, 10 years more, and they just lived with it. They didn't sleep. They were couldn't eat, or overate, or smoked, drank, became alcoholics, substance abusers, gamblers, you name it. All the things that happen when you don't deal with what's going on in here. People don't realize what that is. So I'd have them in, I'd explain what prolonged exposure is. And what I'll do is I'll send you the article. I have a published article on it that's very specific. And in some of my articles, I write it in dialogue form. So they'll see exactly what I would say and what they will say. And then they are more comfortable. Sometimes they call me and say, hey, I saw your article. Could you do that with me? So here's my shock. All right. It takes maybe a week to 10 days. And I was thinking, well, this can't be possible, because in school, they always told us never say cure. Okay. But they continued in treatment, or if, they went on or moved out of state, whatever, I still follow up with everybody every year to see if a new trauma, which they always have, triggered the old trauma. And it did not. So I was just shocked and pleased. And there are a number, like I said, we just do evidence-based treatment. So some of my trainers are police psychologists as well, and they use EMDR and other techniques. There's about 4 of them that have research behind them. The other piece is medication, and a lot of officers don't know they can be on medication. There's some medications they can't be on, anything that interferes with reaction time that would put themselves or the public in danger. But if they're suffering from depression, anxiety, panic disorder, which is typically the presentation, there's great medication for that they can be on. And they usually, I don't know, we could do a dance and kind of fight up and back for months before they go, okay, I'll try. And just start out real low. I'm conservative, so start out real low. I don't prescribe. I have a psychiatrist who my cops love, and mostly they don't like the psychiatrist, but I found this guy and was wonderful. And I just said, can I teach you about cop culture? I need someone, a place to send my guys and gals. And he said, yeah. So they go to him for the medication. And once they get regulated on that, they're always kind of surprised, like, why did I go so long? I felt so bad for so long. I didn't even tell my spouse I was having panic attacks. And then this stuff is incredible. And I said, the advantage is the newer antidepressants, they're not addictive. So I'd rather you do this than drink or use drugs or do any of these other things. Okay, this you can keep your job with, and you'll be able to function. And once you learn all of the anxiety management skills, well, then you're ready to go. And so that's the best part of it. And I wish in every police academy, they'd have someone in right in the beginning, teach them all of it, so that they enter their career with those in their bag. Because I always say, I don't want you dependent on me, that you have to, if you have a problem, you have to call me and come in to fix that piece. Now, they know they can call me 24/7 anytime, and they do, but it's something short. But I want them to feel empowered, that they own these skills, because frankly, we should all have them. Look what's going on now. I mean, I'm seeing people again that I hadn't seen in so long, based on the pandemic. Imagine someone who was agoraphobic and I treated 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now they're given permission to stay home. So we got to talk about that, because then sometimes they get a little fearful about going out again. It's been over a year. Some of them haven't been out or have only gone to the store. So we have, it's a little bit off the topic of cops, but just generally speaking, a practice so that we can get them out every day, even if they don't see people, so that we don't redevelop some of those things.
You mentioned something very interesting there, which I think may be a little bit unique to policing, in that, I think probably the first cases of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, were known from war veterans, people who have been to war and have come away with horrible symptoms that lasted for years and years. The reason why they lasted is because they weren't diagnosed and treated. Now, many of these people have left the army, but with our police officers, they carry on with their job. So because you mentioned, there was an original trauma, but there's always going to be new traumas, to varying extents. So, you might see, I don't know, one of the worst things, their child, or, horrific car accident, or you might be in a shootout, and there will always be, I don't want to scare anyone, but, there will be other occasions that could potentially have traumatic influences on you. And then if you just let them pile up, what do you expect is going to happen with that? And I'm just talking, I'm not judging individual officers, but I think agencies just need to realize that, and what you say is really good, that, as soon as they come to police academy, let's give them those tools. Let them learn about how to handle stress. Let them learn about how to build up resilience. Let them learn about how important it is to communicate with other people about what you've just experienced, and that it's healthy and it's not a sign of weakness. And, like you said earlier, it's not a suck it up and move on. This is how it is culture anymore. Policing has become so different. And than it was, 200 years ago, when they were basically running after thieves. That's what they were doing. And
Right.
nowadays it's just so much more involved. So there's something very unique about policing, and policing has changed very much. Whereas I think the experience of the trauma of war maybe hasn't. You're still being sent out because other people much higher up in the decision-making chain have problems with each other. It's got nothing to do with you, but you have to do certain things that, in the bigger scheme of things, you need to think about, how do I feel about this? But no matter how I feel, if I don't do it, I'm a deserter. And it's a very different concept, but that has changed, that has stayed the same. Policing changes, and you go home every day to your family with what you've seen and what you've just done. So that's a very, very unique set of circumstances there. I don't know if you work with people who have fought in wars as well, or is it mainly law enforcement?
I do, but the interesting thing is a lot of officers come to the job when they get out of the service. So they've already been in Iraq and Afghanistan, and sometimes I'm surprised, sometimes 4 or 6 times. So they're used to a military structure, and law enforcement is paramilitary. So, they know how to live that life, so to speak. But they've never talked about the trauma, not with their families, not with anybody. I mean, I have officers that have never talked to their spouse, their best friend. Nobody knows, and they just suffer. They just suffer, and it's a heartbreak, because we have treatment out there. We have excellent treatment. So, like you're saying, it's the young ones we really want to catch, but not unusual. And I think we're going to see it more and more, that people from the military will still be going into law enforcement.
Tell me about this no doesn't mean no thing, because that's a new phrase when we've been drumming no means no into people, but you're having a very interesting thing there. Tell me about that.
Well, I developed this because what I realized in session was, particularly with officers, not only, but we have to do a very in-depth evaluation because of suicide risk. So now they don't want to go to the hospital. So they're balancing that with, well, if I tell her, then what's going to happen? And where's this going to go? So when I ask about suicidal ideation or thoughts, and then I ask about, do you have plans? And do you have intention? Well, with cops, we know they have guns. We don't even have to ask them, okay, do you have, I mean, and not all use guns, but most officer suicides are with guns. It's the easiest. So what I tell them is, let me ask you something. I go, if you had to commit suicide, and of course you don't, what method would you use? Because you said you never thought about it even. And they said, well, if I had to, well, I don't know. I said, well, would you set yourself on fire? Like, no. I go, would you hang yourself? No. Would you shoot yourself? Probably. Would you go in the garage and turn the car on? No, I don't think so. So then I say, well, see, now we started with no when I asked you about suicide, but now we know, just like everybody else, at some point in our head, we may never plan to do it. Most people don't kill themselves, but we do think when we hear about it, geez, I don't know if I would do that or that. So what I tell them is, now that you told me that, I know this is an open discussion for us now. So when you tell me you're having thoughts, it doesn't mean that you're going to act on those. It tells me your level of depression, how upset you are, how your functioning is being impacted. So what I'm asking you is, don't automatically say no, because we all have those thoughts. And I had to think to myself, well, what would I do if I had it, but I always say, it's so funny because no one ever says to me, well, why would I have to? Everyone just kind of goes with the premise. So people don't understand on the therapist side, if you have 9 patients stacked up hour after hour after hour, and one of them says, yes, I'm going to kill myself, then the therapist is like, uh-oh, now what? Then you got to cancel a whole day, get on the phone, get the, and so it's difficult. So some therapists that I train, I say, be careful how you ask the question. You don't want to say like you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Because what you're asking them to say is no. And then you miss the opportunity to gather that information. So obviously most will never do it, but some will, and some will tell you how, and you'll know more about that. And also once you open that discussion, then they know they can say to me, Doc, I was thinking about it. I thought it would just be quick and I'd be done, but then it would devastate my family, and they'd lose my pension if they knew it was suicide. So then they start talking about it, and that's what I need for them to talk about it, and then I can see where the symptomology is and how deep the depression is or any other issues, and then we can focus on those as well. So that's where I developed the no doesn't always mean no concept, because everyone obviously knows the other one. So I use it with everyone, not just officers. I also work fire and ER docs and other first responders, but probably my heaviest group is with law enforcement. Does it make sense?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So you're basically using a backdoor way rather than accepting, the superficial first reactive answer, which is almost like a reflex, to get more information and to see is there something we need to do here, or is it okay? Is it really something that hasn't been on the forefront of their mind a lot?
You got it. That's exactly it.
Okay.
And so when I tell other therapists, they're like, "Ooh, that's good," because I could be missing some. And I don't know about other therapists or psychologists. Oh my God, I'd be devastated. I mean, I'm a person like anyone else. If I heard that someone had done that, I just would have difficulty forever. And I don't know, to continue practicing. You don't want to think of it happening, but you have to be very assertive and aggressive. And because therapists don't want it to happen, we have to look at our own issues. And if we're pushing down those questions because we don't want to hear, yes, I have a gun, I have a plan, I know where I'm going to do it, I know when I'm going to do it. That's a whole different ballgame. And frankly, when they tell me that, that's a gift. That's a gift. They're saying, I trust you and help me. And what can we do about this now? Whereas before the development of the program, no was the pretty typical answer.
And it was just accepted, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me how you help those who work with, so here we call them IOC, indecent images of children. You call them ICAC. What does it stand for? And how do you help people who have to deal with some of the worst imagery you could possibly imagine that I hope I never ever see?
No, if you have children, you don't want to, but most of that work, internet crimes against children, or we call it ICAC here, they're in a bad situation, really. Most of them in smaller departments are stuck with the job, because my thing is, you can do 2 years if you can handle that and then out. And some of them are on there 6 years, 9 years. I go, can I talk to your chief? And they say, I talked to my chief. And the chief said, look, you're good at it and we don't have anyone else. So that's your detail. And that's super difficult to know that. So what I've come up with are some ways for them to manage some of the imagery. So imagine looking, like you said, you're seeing videos of the worst a human could do to another human, and that human's a child. And if they have children, it's devastating. So they have to find some way to defend themselves. So I tell them, when they're looking at that, remember what their job is. It's to identify the victim, the perpetrator, or the location, depending on what piece you don't know. And if the information is so overwhelming, slow it down. Don't watch it in video. Take single shots. Minimize it. Make the picture smaller. Stand away from it. I say, don't fall in. Don't fall in, because then it's difficult to do the job. But what most people don't realize is it interferes with family life. It interferes with their marriage. Imagine them seeing this all day, and to be frank, then when they go to have intercourse with their partner, the images pop in their head, but they never tell their spouse because they don't know what language, how to explain something like that. So they tend to isolate, come in the house, isolate, sit on the couch, drink beer, watch TV, and that just becomes a habit as a way of managing those images. And it's very difficult for those images to go away. So I like to be volunteer. I don't think anyone should be forced to do it. And I like it limited. I also like before they go on the team, for them to sit with somebody, a psychologist, and talk about what it is they're going to see and how they're going to handle it, and learn some skills in how to handle that. But also they need a parachute to pull the string and jump out. To be stuck is really difficult. And it's interesting when I'm training, on break, officers will kind of whistle me over and say, "Can I tell you something?" They don't say, "Can I ask you something?" They say, "Can I tell you something?" Yeah, what? And they tell me just the horrifying thing that they had seen, that they can't really carry anymore. And then they just say, "Thank you." They just wanted to get it out of their system. And then I go, "Well, call me if you need to." Okay. And we'll work on it. And then in session, there's some other things that we can do. But in the immediate, I have a program called A Sip of Poison. And that's the ICAC program. So what I tell them is, when you finish roll call and everybody goes and gets ready for their assignments, and the ICAC team usually goes in the basement with no windows, just traditionally, it's kind of hidden. Everyone else does what they do, grabs their coffee. I go, but you turn on that video and you're taking a sip of poison, essentially. So then they're like, yes, but people don't understand that. And so that's how we kind of help them do this job. The thing that people do not know, which is so fascinating, in my research about this, is everyone thinks that they don't like their job. But in fact, most of them do. They feel like when they get someone in prison, they are actually saving thousands of lives. If you knew how many predators were out there and how frequently children are being abused by strangers over the internet, family members, I mean, you name it. It's astounding. And if you have children, it's devastatingly frightening. So if they bring up something I haven't heard of, then we talk about that, and we find a way to manage it. But they feel really proud that they're taking these guys off the street. When these guys are convicted, they're thrilled. But I also give them some language, because people approach them inappropriately and they'll say, "Well, what do you like watching that stuff?" Or, "How come you're doing that detail?" Or, "What's wrong with you that you like to look at that?" And it's offensive because they don't like to look at it. They're just looking for the guy who did it. They're just looking for the perpetrator. So I give them some language to respond to those people. And they go, "Oh, thanks," and write down some sentences that back those people off. Because you can't really explain to a citizen, or even sometimes someone in another department, what the experience is like. But like I said, I like them to be able to leave when they're ready to leave and do another detail. So like I said, it depends on the department and how much they understand it. And just grateful they exist. I don't know if you have this in England, but here you can choose any town or city, and you can put it in the computer, and you can look for every registered sex offender that lives near you. And I would actually recommend that you do that. They're not just pedophiles. I mean, they're rapists, you name it, any kind of sexual crime. The numbers you'd be shocked and sickened to know how many and how close they are to your house. So it's I don't know. I'm impressed that they can do this. They're just outstanding officers. And frankly, most of the officers I work with are just outstanding. And my concerns about not having treatment, not having somewhere to go, not having tools or a toolbox, means that their life will be shortened, that they'll have problems with alcohol. There's 35% increased risk of cardiac problems with officers. I mean, they eat poorly, they eat fast food. There's just a lot of re-education that has to go into it. And what I notice now when I'm training the FTOs is some on break, they'll, you see they're bringing in their fast food or whatever, but the other ones, they bring their food with them and they have fruits and vegetables and, you're doing good. So it's not I still have my cops that eat donuts, don't get me wrong, that's part of the culture. So, but in terms of ICAC, please salute these people. They're just outstanding. And a lot of trauma is actually caused by seeing a dead child or a child being hurt. And so it's not atypical for that to be the presenting problem when they come in. Now, Dr. Ann Bisick is a woman in California. She's the national expert in child death. And while that's a difficult place to put your interest in energies, she's helped us all so much in the kinds of information that she gives us to help. But don't be surprised if that's the presenting problem, is seeing a child hurt or injured.
It's interesting when you were describing the some of the techniques you're recommending to those officers who have to view those images and videos, the slowing down and decreasing the size, that remind me a little bit of neurolinguistic programming. Does it have anything to do with that at all?
Well, I was trained in that, but I didn't think about that at the time. I just knew that we're going to have to do something different. The other thing I tell them is, if you're watching the video, turn off the audio, then listen to the audio and turn off the video, because the whole thing at one time is really overwhelming. And it's easier to get the information if you split it in half. And so they report back, you know what, that is a little bit easier. I mean, it's still not good news. So every time they tell me something, I go, okay, I'm adding it to the program. Thanks. Because they're on board, they're there. And no one knows better than they do. They're the experts. My cops are the experts. They're fabulous.
If you could wave a magic wand to make one change in policing and law enforcement, what would that change be?
Well, it's interesting because we have this movement now called defund the police. And I'm like, what? The police were never funded. Okay. I've done so many ride-alongs where like the seatbelt doesn't work and the door's falling off. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so in a lot of states, including Illinois, we've just had laws passed that take a lot of police powers away. So I actually have officers leaving the state in large numbers. However, I think that that's going to transfer into other states as well, because the cop culture is so negative and people look at what one officer does. I mean, you have bad accountants, you got bad teachers, you got in every field, but in policing, it's on the news and it's not good. And we admit that we have those bad ones. But if you saw what most officers do every day, you would just be impressed with what they put on the line. Now, you did bring up something interesting about the younger group. In the old days, an officer would take any overtime. Okay, that they just work. Hey, can you do another 6? I'll stay. The young ones, no, they value family over the time and money. And if they're ordered to, obviously they have to. But if it's a volunteer, they'll go home. It's interesting.
So what would be the change you would like to see if you had the power to make one?
I would like them fully funded. I would like them to be able to have cameras. A lot of departments, they were all required to have cameras, and they like them because it shows that they didn't do what they were accused of doing. However, the storage costs for keeping those videos up in the cloud is more than most departments can afford. So they say, here's what you need to do, but they don't give them the money to do it. So the magic wand would be that they would be respected and fully funded and allowed to train as needed. Like when I go into a department, sometimes they go, my training budget is really small. And, I have a price that here's what it costs to have this amount of training, but, I have departments that just can't cover it. And, I don't care. So take less and I go, because that's what we do. So the magic wand is to stop this hatred of the police, because the fact of the matter is most of the population like the police, count on the police, depend on the police, and their only interaction is speeding ticket. So, but who gets the airtime? The really bad one. So if we could change that, and just if they knew what these gals and guys go through, it's pretty dang impressive.
If you only took if somebody watching this interview took only one thing away from everything we've talked about, what would you want that takeaway to be?
Number one would be to break the stigma, make a relationship with a private psychologist who has knowledge of police culture. Because if we have that in the beginning, then that's the safety net for them. And they can go their full career and have someone to rely on. We'll see if that happens. I'm positive.
Going forward. Very good.
Going forward, please. Yeah. So, and I think what will happen is, as more and more, like here in Illinois, where they took away a lot of the police powers, as more and more citizens realize what police aren't allowed to do anymore, they're going to say, are you kidding me? I'm calling the police because I have a homeless guy sleeping on my porch. And the police can say, I'm sorry, I can only give him a ticket. I can't remove him. I can't do anything. I mean, they've just kind of gutted policing in Illinois. And I hope not where you are, but some of that is spreading to other towns. Because you have to remember, police departments are funded by the village or the city, and they don't see the police as added value, so to speak, because they don't produce income. So they don't want to give them more money or more tax money that they're bringing in. They want to use that for something else. But I want people to see what it's going to be like without the police, and it's going to be really scary. So I'm hoping that as the months go by, this just passed recently in July, a lot of it goes into effect, that citizens will really say, we want the police back.
That is a really big problem, how you evaluate policing, because it can't be just crime solved, because that would encourage and from the top down put pressure on officers to record crimes in a way that are going to be easier to resolve than others. It might discourage reporting, and not because people want to falsify records or anything. It's just if the amount you get from the state or the government, or here it's the council tax of each county, if you measure policing by how many crimes are recorded, you're putting pressure on the police to record crimes. If it's down to how many crimes are not recorded, you're putting pressure on the police not to record crime. Sometimes the way to crime recording is done changes, and all of a sudden it seems there's a rise or a drop in something when actually nothing has really changed.
Right.
How do you evaluate something to show that it's worked because it hasn't happened? So how do you evaluate prevented crime? Now, counterterrorism units are usually pretty well funded, and there's not much to show for it, but that's a good thing.
Right.
I think in the very old Chinese days, a physician, a doctor, was basically paid, probably maybe not in money, but was going around the area, their village, was maybe given groceries or whatever it is because they were keeping the population healthy. Now that's an interesting concept. Whereas now, it's the pharmaceuticals that drive all the development and the research and the finances in medicine. Whereas it used to be about health prevention. And I think that's a very interesting concept. But how do you ever, we can prove how much policing needs to be done by, okay, a certain practice is stopped or reduced. For example, here and not just here, I'm sure there's this controversial topic of stop and search, that people who are stopped and searched, it's disproportionate to the racial makeup of the population. So you do it less, and knife crime goes up, because unfortunately the victims of knife crime and the perpetrators of knife crime is very similar or the same demographics. And you may feel that they're being over policed because you're targeting them for stops and searches, because the intelligence you've received as the police tells you this person might be armed, but actually they're being under policed because they're not being protected enough from others in the same demographic who are carrying knives. So it's very difficult to get this right. I sort of lost my train of thought. I don't know why I got into stop and search, but it was all about how do you quantify the benefits of policing. It's very difficult, because either something happens and that's bad because it wasn't prevented. Nothing happens, then how do you know that you prevented it? And all right, that's how. So you can maybe defund the police and then see what happens. And already in some of the fallout from the police protests you've had in America, you could see that there were, I think in one city there were, you will know this much better than me, there was a no-go zone for police, and people had basically blocked it off, and then there were murders going on in there. And I'm thinking, okay, so how can you say that it's the police causing these problems when people are killing each other? It just doesn't make sense. And it's a very, very difficult topic, the whole quantifying, evaluating and measuring the effectiveness of policing in some ways. But yeah, that's not easy.
No, I think you're correct. And one of the problems we have here is there is this whole race card that keeps getting thrown in. So if race is involved in a situation where the perpetrator or whoever is killed, that's all over the news for months. It just never ends. But what they don't see is, well, at least here in Chicago, we can have 48 and have people killed in a weekend in gang-related violence. It's not even on the news, and it's all within race, but you don't hear about it.
Yes, it's actually the black population that is getting killed left, right, and center. But when one police officer kills a black person, it's mayhem on the media, and it's as an outsider, I don't know which news channels are veering towards which direction. But first of all, it's quite interesting and shocking to see how opinionated news channels in America have been and the things they can say. Whereas here, I'm more used to people, okay, you're reporting something, you have to be neutral about it. I did not see neutrality in some of the news coverage over there, and it's very, very selective, and it's so polarizing, and that is so dangerous. And I'm just waiting for the media to get, well, so they are getting sued, on a case-by-case basis for infringing someone's privacy, but as a collective, at some point, they need to be given some collective responsibility for what they actually can impact, because they can impact the behavior of masses of people so much more than many other institutions. And it's just such a dangerous hotbed of, it's a minefield. And somehow that needs to be regulated, where if you're reporting something that happened, okay, have you checked it, the way you are reporting it, is it accurate and is it neutral? And have you looked at the counterbalance? Have you played devil's advocate to actually go on air and say that this has happened? Now, for example, with my news story with Police Science Doctor, I'm not publishing or talking about my own research. I'm sharing the research of other people. I'm taking other people's research and I'm sharing it, I'm translating it into a way that people can make sense of. And I do this weekly science snippets thing, the police science snippets, where I take somebody's research and I talk about it, send it out, but I always have the reference in there. So it's, don't take my word for it. This is the article where this research was published. Go and check and read for yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of it is behind a paywall, but you can read the abstract, you can see what it was about and who did it. But I think this accountability for me is very important, because I don't want to be talking about something that is for me an anecdotal experience, or that is my opinion. I talk about research, and here's the source. And I think the accountability is very important to me, because I want to be a trusted source.
Yes.
But some things that you see on the media is highly irresponsible, I think, and dangerous, very dangerous.
I think you're right. And it's funny, when I grew up, we had, they just read the facts. We didn't have these stations that were left or right. And it's odd to me. And I've been interviewed by, I won't say who, but national, newspapers and organizations. And I asked them, please don't put those statistics in there, because everybody wants the number. How many people kill themselves? That's what they want. I go, please don't put it in there, because it's not accurate. And they say, fine, and I don't know which organizations are putting these out, but I haven't seen an article where a number isn't put out. And so I said to them, whatever happened to fact checking? Because when I grew up, there was a whole department at any newspaper that fact checked. And she laughed at me. And she said, we don't have money to do that. And I thought, well, then you should not be doing your job, because I'm not really interested in your opinion. I don't know you, don't really care about you. I just want to hear what happened. So to your point, we're kind of desperate for that, just the facts, ma'am, so to speak. We're just not getting it.
Well, if you don't have money for it, get someone to do work experience, get a grad student to do a summer job or an intern, because it would be fantastic experience if you can put that on your CV, on your resume, I think you call it, that you spent a summer at a newspaper being a fact checker. That's fantastic work experience. And you don't have to pay them that much, but it's important. I don't think people should be allowed to be blasting out news without actually having checked them. That seems very,
I don't either.
very dangerous.
I don't either. And I think it's happening more and more. And we don't have enough money, to me, was not an acceptable reason. Okay. So then you limit what you say, and then people will trust you. But people don't trust what's on TV or in the newspapers anymore, because they're used to this, just heavy left or heavy right. You don't have a lot of just facts. But yeah, I appreciate so much you bringing up all these topics, because so many people just are not familiar with the mental health side of officers. Okay. And so, of course, everywhere I go, I talk about it, and my training team talks about it, and the board talks about it, but we're just us. So I just appreciate the opportunity so much. And I love what you're doing, making information that the public normally would not see, not read, or understand, because it's clinical or research based, statistical, and then you present this, and wow, you're the first kid on the block. Excellent.
Thank you. Well, I'm really glad that you feel it's worthwhile, and it's just something that I think needed to be done, and I could do it. So I'm doing it. Come hell or high water. Been in trouble with employers because of it, but I'm doing it. I'm getting that information out there. There's so many rabbit holes we could go down, and so many interesting topics. And I really enjoyed this interview. And yeah, it was just so full. And I'm getting the feeling it's not going to be my last interview with you, if that's okay.
I'd be glad to. Yeah. We could pick any of the topics. I have a lot of programs that I developed. I like to develop. If it's not there, I'll develop it. If I see like there's a little hole here, how could I fix that? Excuse me. So yeah, you got any questions, let me know, and I'm available.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Marla Friedman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.